Bore da gyfeillion. Good morning, everybody. My name's Elin Jones, and I represent Wales Literature Exchange here this morning, going into this afternoon. Fáilte agus benvinguts I benvingudes eta ongi etorriak. We welcome you to our session this morning on a different window onto the world. This session is brought to you through a collaboration between Creative Scotland and the consortium of organisations of the Wales stand at London Book Fair. Now, in our title, we may be giving the impression that Wales and Scotland are no longer part of Europe. But please, it's just a tease. We don't really mean that in any way. It's marketing, you know. And similarly, we look at the question of Indigenous in our context too, in a very problematized way. We know that we're able to look at the year of 2019 as the Unesco Year of Indigenous Languages. And while in some contexts it's very appropriate to include languages such as Scottish Gaelic, Welsh, Basque and Catalan alongside other Indigenous languages in the world, we're also very aware that the Indigenous space is also a specific space that has been claimed, rightly so, by groups who consider themselves to be Indigenous peoples across the world. And in those spaces, the Welsh, the Catalans, the Basques, and the Scottish Gaels don't necessarily always fit because it is the Indigenous people's spaces, and sometimes they invite us in, and sometimes they want to have that space for themselves, and that is right and proper. But there are many contexts in which we share similar problems and similar challenges, not least in terms of our linguistic identity. And while our identities and our linguistic identities are very much based on a sense of civic identity, we still share many of the issues that are very much live issues for people who speak Indigenous languages and Indigenous people who speak Indigenous languages. So we look forward to a lively panel debate now with our four panelists. On my right here we have Carmele Chayo. She's a journalist, she's a novelist and a short story writer, and she writes in the Basque language. Then next to Carmele is Albert Fons. He's a journalist, novelist and a published poet in Catalan. On my left here, Cara Lewis. She's a novelist, short story writer, screenwriter and children's writer. And then finally here, and he's going to correct my pronunciation because I'm afraid I don't speak Scottish Gaelic, Nuas Machkneachil. No?
Nuas Machkneachil.
Oh, wrong. Apologies.
But I do allow you to refer to me as
Angus McNichol. There we go. Now, we're presenting four writers today who write in languages that have a very varied range of literary outputs, that have different levels of publishing industry, and that have varied numbers of speakers and of readership. If we take one part of the continuum, then we have, because actually they haven't actually sat in the correct order for me to do it in this way. But if we start with Angus, then Scottish Gaelic has a speaking population of around 60,000. Then we move on to Welsh, that has a speaking population of around 600,000. Basque, slightly more, possibly hitting 1 million. And then Catalan, several million speakers. So there is a wide range of sizes of literature, of sizes of publishing industries, but when we look at languages such as these, I'm always reminded of the words of the Icelandic poet Sion, who said there's no such thing as a small language. All we have is languages with small numbers of speakers. And I think that really sort of presents many linguistic scenes and literary scenes very, very adequately. So, Carol, if I could start with you, how do you see yourself as a writer writing predominantly in Welsh? How do you see yourself within your scene? And how do you see yourself perhaps in terms of the range of genre that you work with?
Thank you for the kind introduction. How do I see myself as a writer? Well, first and foremost, as just a writer, I think, doing anything that any other writer would be doing. But also writing in a language that was my first language until the age of about 8 or 9. I didn't speak English until that time. And also a writer writing in a language that is my everyday language, the language that I bank in, the language that I speak in the shop, and the majority language of my community. So there's that aspect of it. We also have an extremely long history, an unbroken literary history in Wales. It's one of the oldest in Europe. Literature in general is highly thought of and highly regarded, and I consider myself very lucky to be writing from that tradition as well. And it is very difficult when we talk about Indigenous and minority, because there are a lot of connotations around those words, that an Indigenous language perhaps is one that is other, or one that is perhaps looks to the past, whereas a majority language, a large language, is a normal language, and it's the ones that look to the future, the cosmopolitan language. So I struggle a bit with these terms myself. But I belong to a generation of novelists. I take my roots from old Welsh literature, but I keep my sights on the future and European literature as well. I feel part of that discussion as well. With my day-to-day work, I'm a novelist. I predominantly think of myself as a novelist. That's my home. I think of writing novels like putting on a pair of slippers. You know, it just feels good and right. Whereas, you know, writing theatre plays, which I do as well, feels like walking in high heels sometimes. You know, it makes you feel good, but there's a high probability you're going to land on your ass. You know what I mean? So there are, but I also write for children, and I have great pleasure in doing that as well. But linguistically, I've moved from maybe positioning myself within the Welsh language literature, classic literature perhaps, and some of my works are on the syllabus and that kind of thing. And I've taken a bit of courage from that and moved recently into screenwriting. And screenwriting in Wales, particularly the crime genre, has taken off with series like Hinterland and these kinds of series, which I worked on. And I also write a new series that's being filmed at the moment, a second series of a hidden or Craith. And we have, through that, been able to introduce, with the popularity of Scandi Noir, and people willing to watch programmes in different languages using subtitles. The Hidden was put out on a Saturday night, 9 o'clock, in the foreign language slot, which is strange because it's in Welsh. It didn't, you know. But there are issues. I mean, it did the job, and because of the success of series like Hinterland, we are able to up the amount of Welsh that is used in some of these newer series. So sometimes I feel I have these flashes of feeling very much a part of the discussion and very much looking outwards, but I sometimes have these little crises. And I had one yesterday on the train coming down here, because I live on a farm in the middle of nowhere with my bees and chickens and various children. I still have them all, I haven't lost one yet, but I tend to not see anyone from day to day, and then listening to all these discussions happening here today, and I sometimes feel a bit like, you know, if Darwin and natural selection that's the way forward. Well, I've had it because I'm ginger to start off with. And I'm very fair-skinned. I'm only comfortable between 11 and 16 degrees, and I can only properly exist between Machynlleth and Cardigan in West Wales. That's my geographical happy region. I also am highly specialised in the work I do, writing in a minority, Indigenous, small or amazing language, depends how you want to look at it. So I am stuffed in many ways, but I'm enjoying it, and that's the main thing.
Thank you, Carol. If I could turn to Albert now to talk perhaps a little bit about how you position yourself. Obviously, you're looking at a much broader market. You're looking at a market of potentially of millions of readers, not only in the Catalan language, but also Catalan is much more accessible to speakers of Spanish and of French and of Italian and other Romance variants. So how do you see yourself in your literary habitus?
So, hello everyone. So yeah, my name is Albert Forns, and I'm quite surprised to be here because I'm normally the one speaking from the small language point of view, and now in this panel, I feel big with our 10 million speakers. Woo! So, well, yeah. And so, as you may know, the Catalan language right now is in a good moment. So we have, apparently, we have like a news media system, we have a publishing system, we have bestsellers, we have bestseller writers like Jaume Cabré, who's translated into many languages. We also have a movie industry system, so apparently everything is fine. And we also have like this, so all this is thanks to that we got democracy in Spain 40 years ago, and we got education in Catalan. So I'm one of the first generation of Catalan that have been able to study Catalan at school, at university, and I'm then writing in Catalan in a apparently normal situation. But that wasn't possible 50 years ago. So we had, our language was forbidden during the 20th century for 40 years, 35 years during the Franco dictatorship, but even before. So it's not that, so it's like a miracle that we are here and that we are still writing in Catalan and having this thriving system. As you see, I'm wearing the grog, the yellow ribbon. Because, as you all know, we are also facing these trials. I'm not here to speak about politics, but you have to. So, I just want to say that the fight for independence, politics, blah, 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 it's also a fight to keep our language alive. Because, as you know, we will have Spanish elections in April, and if the far right wins, that would mean that they would try to remove Catalan from education, and they will try to get us back to where we were 50 years ago. No, so I'm happy. The Catalan language is thriving and it's fighting and it's struggling, but we just want to keep this way. And then next question we will talk about what's been done and what can we do to promote our literatures. But there is also this fear that we're gonna get attacked again and all these things. So then I think that's it for now. Yeah.
Thanks, Albert. Could I now ask Carmele to talk a little bit about the situation of the Basque literary scene and where you fit in there? Because unlike perhaps the situation of Welsh that has a continuous literary tradition and a continuous written literary tradition for many, many, many centuries, the Basque literary tradition has been for many centuries an oral tradition and oral alone, and that is also only possibly in the 20th century that it has become to populate wider literary genre. And you would be part of a generation of people who were able to start their literary careers when the infrastructure had been put in place to support Basque as a literary language. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your work too.
Yeah, hello. Yes, as you say, our language is very old. It's very old, it's a pre-Indo-European language, but it's very young at the same time, because the language was standardized and unified 60 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we are also, like you said, the first generation, people of my generation, the first generation of people that have studied in Basque, in the university and the school. So we are writing in a very old language, but we are at the same time like beginning a new etapa. So our situation is we are a minority language. We are a minority language in our own country. It's 37%, I think, is the knowledge of Basque in our country. So we have a lot of limitations when we write. We have a limited audience. So for us, translation is very, in this sense, is very important. And I think we are very conscious of in which language we are writing, because all of Basque writers, like Catalan writers, I think, all of us are bilingual, because we live in a country between two very powerful languages, French and Spanish. So we need to know Spanish. For example, in the south, in my country, we need to know Spanish also. So the first step, we have to think first, in which language am I going to write. So this step, so we are more conscious in the sense of in which language we are writing, and I say that we are in our country the other. I mean, if you go to a library in the Basque country, most of the books are in Spanish, in the south in Spanish, and we have our section of Basque novels or Basque books wrote in Basque. No? So we want to be writers, but we are Basque writers in our country. No? Sometimes we have to. A lot of people ask us, and why don't you write in Spanish? Everyone is going to understand you better, and I think it's a question very difficult to do. No? It's we want to write in our language. It's our window, our little window, like the. Yeah. And for example, I suppose you know Bernardo Achaga is our most main writer, and he says that a writer, when writes, it's like a mouse that goes into a big room, no? But the mouse goes into the big room through a little hole. No? It's a way to speak about universal themes, but with a very concrete story. No? And I think the language in this sense is the same. You write from your little hole, no? And it's our way to do it. So that's our situation, more or less.
Thank you. Thank you, Carmela. I'll turn finally to Nuas about your experiences, because you actually do write in more than one language. You write in Gaelic, in Scottish Gaelic, but you also write in English as well. So perhaps you'd say a few things about where you sit in your literary scene then.
bratach. De goeie kleuhig, feil zich je heen. De garage is misje en tamet een neuv en baard. Arkes eestrum. Banner. Your voice crying, reveal yourself. Friend, I am the holy fool, the bard. Observe and listen. I thought I would begin by giving you a taste of my own language. I like to tell people I was born BE, before electricity. The sentence does continue, came to our village with the development of hydroelectric schemes around the islands and highlands. So when I went to school at the age of 5, well, even before I went to school, my first experience with another language I referred to as Brian Vuye, the yellow speaking. I must have been maybe 3 years old or thereabouts when I heard a youth hostler coming to see if he could buy some milk from my mother and speaking in English. So my first few years were entirely immersed in Gaelic. I went to school at the age of 5. My teacher's job was a Gaelic speaking teacher with a class of Gaelic speakers. Her job was to teach us English, which from then on was the language of authority and the language of education. At the age of 12, I went to secondary school, having been taught through the medium of English with no access to Gaelic. And I had to make a choice at the age of 12 between Gaelic and French as a modern language, if you like. I thought I could take another language in the third year, but I'm not going to go into the details of why I couldn't. But I chose Gaelic rather than French. I chose my own language, which was taught to a class of native Gaelic speakers by a native Gaelic speaking teacher through the medium of English. Here am I do write, lately I've been writing more in English than in Gaelic, but I still write in my native language. I tend to be known in Scotland as the Gaelic poet. I'm the poet who happens to write in Gaelic, English, and in Scotland we also have at least one other language, Scots, Broad Scots, and the people of Shetland would probably tell you you've also got Shetlandic. We're a fairly linguistically cosmopolitan small nation. But that essentially is my story in terms of relationship to my native language. I went to university. I had 3 wonderful years at Glasgow University collecting 1 year's worth of passes. I went to learn how to become a poet because there were various poets on the staff whose work attracted me. I did decide to choose Gaelic as one of my subjects, and the Gaelic department at Glasgow University hosted the Gaelic Quarterly Girim, and the assistant editor, who had been to the same school as me and was younger than me, Donald John MacLeod, he would ask me every quarter, do you have any poems for the magazine? And that's what really got me starting writing poetry in Gaelic. Until then, I had seen myself as poet, ergo writing in English. Things changed, as I say, because of that, and some years later I was invited to be writer-in-residence at the Gaelic College in Skye, at which point I almost entirely gave up writing in English. I should say that Gaelic poetry has taken me as far east as Japan, as far west as Seattle and Vancouver. I have read my own Gaelic poetry at the United Nations building in New York. My last outing, I had an audience of a mere 25,000 in Scotland, on a field near Stirling. I was crafty, because my friends in the Gaelic rock band Runrig were playing their final concert, and I had written the poem called Runrig. So they invited me to read it at their final concert. In the midst of all these achievements, I'd like to let people know I did also on one occasion in Bonnie, Scotland, outnumber my audience. To the great embarrassment of the organiser and to my great delight, because I knew that for the rest of my life I have a gag line. If anyone thinks you're getting ideas above your station mate, I did once outnumber my audience. In terms of the numbers of Gaelic speakers, you may be right. I think that the next census could be interesting. My son is now 30. when he was 5, he went as one of a tiny little group to Tollcross Primary School in Edinburgh, where there was a Gaelic unit. The beginnings of Gaelic medium education in Scotland. So we're talking about 25 years ago or thereabouts. Edinburgh now has a great new Gaelic school bursting at the seams. They're talking about opening a second Gaelic school. Glasgow likewise started with a very small Gaelic medium unit. They've now got 2 fully overflowing Gaelic medium schools, and they're talking about opening a third with several hundred pupils. So whether Gaelic continues to decline or whether the impetus from the young and from the parents of young people will help it grow, we're still in interesting times, shall we say.
Thank you. We'd like to look now at how these writers have been able to internationalise their careers. We've heard that, you've travelled the globe with your Gaelic language or your Scottish Gaelic language poetry. But
I should say, if there's anyone here from the southern hemisphere, I haven't yet been invited south of the equator, so I'm at an age
all
where I don't have long to go,
invitations.
so please.
Well, Indonesia is the market focus, but we want to look at what kind of experiences our writers have had in terms of internationalising their careers. What kind of infrastructure do they need? And is there a way in which these types of languages need to be developed for international work that is perhaps different or possibly similar to other small languages in terms of numbers of speakers that are the languages of sovereign states. So in a way, do we internationalise a Catalan writer's career very much in the same way as we would expect a Finnish writer or a Czech writer or a Maltese writer to be able to internationalise their careers? Albert was selected as one of the new voices of the Literary Europe Live programme developed by Literature Across Frontiers. And also we know that the Institute Ramon Llull is very engaged in international work in this sector. So Albert, would you be able to say a few things about your own career and how you'd like your own career to be developed internationally?
Yeah, okay. First, I think we must agree that the Catalan literature right now is facing like a small boom. It's booming right now, and it's thanks mostly to governmental promotion. And when I'm talking about governmental promotion, I'm not talking about the Spanish government, but the Catalan one, right? So it's the titanic efforts of the Ramon Llull Institute that are helping promoting Catalan writers abroad, but also filmmakers, etc. Now we are seeing some Catalan classics from the 20th century translated, like Mercè Rodoreda or Joan Sales, who wrote the best book on the Spanish Civil War that you will be able to read. But also they are helping translate new and young authors. And I think it was last year or similar that Alicia Koff got translated into English and into several languages. So the Ramon Llull Institute and the government, so the work they are doing, it's really important. What we need, I think, it's more readers or Catalanophiles, people in all these stages of the publishing world. So we need scouts that are able to read in Catalan, agents, publishers, and that are not fearful to read in Catalan. So, because we've been having our translation during decades through bridge languages. Usually Spanish was our bridge, so so our books got translated into Spanish, and then international publishers got to know these authors. But now that's not working anymore, because Catalan authors are facing problems are not translated into Spanish because Spanish audience, I think it's due to the politics, but are not willing to read Catalan authors. And then the rich languages right now are French, are English, and German. So through these translators, then small publishers from small languages, you can publish in Hungarian, in Chinese, but it's mostly through French, English, and German. And then let me end with some self-criticism about that, because I think the key element in here is that we must rely on quality. We must improve the quality of our writing, and we need to write better books. In the Catalan system, there is this Catalan bestsellers that sometimes we have bestsellers that are written by, I don't know, people who appears on television, journalists. There are books that are not quality books, but they sell a lot in Catalonia, but they are not suitable for translation. And we need to work to make better quality books, because Catalan books are like underdone. So I think we need this like Norwegian 4-year Nausguardian grants. That would help, you know. We cannot write a book in 4 months. We need more grants, probably governmental grants, in order to like slow cook the books. And then, you know, because when you are investing, the more you invest in quality, the more you will get from these books.
Thank you. And as we know, Albert, that a bestseller at home is not necessarily what is good for the translated market in other countries too. I'll turn to Carol now. You've been writing for the best part of 2 decades. I'd like to remind you of that. She looks so young. No, she started very young. And some of your books have been published in English translation, some of your novels, but equally some of your children's books have been published in Welsh and in English pretty much the same time. And also some of your work has travelled through television, that you've been part of one of the biggest sort of Welsh language TV drama series of recent times, a Gwell Hinterland, a Nordic noir set in Wales that's travelled to many, many countries across the globe, and that is available in the UK, at least through Netflix, and I don't know about the Netflix in various countries. So your work has travelled, but what kind of additionality would you kind of expect now at this point in your career to make sure that your work can actually get beyond Welsh reading audiences and a limited number of your books available to English reading audiences?
Well, I think it's a lack of continuity of development that I find that's most frustrating, and I think other Welsh writers feel the same, in that it comes in, it's a bit sporadic. You know, somebody will get a grant perhaps and translate one novel, and that may happen 5 years, 6, 7 years after you wrote that novel, and you may be in a very different place by now, or you've developed your writing, or you're writing about new things that interest you. So it's just having that continuity. We need, and I think that comes a lot from not having advocates and not having agents either, because it's perfectly possible in Wales to have your whole career and not have a writing agent. You handle everything yourself. So I think we don't have somebody tell us, you know, have you thought about this, and develop you as a writer. And I think we do suffer slightly because of that. We need cultural exchanges. I've been really lucky to be able to take part in some literature festivals in Kerala this year, and I've travelled a bit over the years and been invited to different places, and these things are so important to get writers out there, and just having a seat at the table, being present at an event like the London Book Fair, etc. We need sample translations, particularly with prose. I think it's easier sometimes for poetry to get samples because it's more self-contained, maybe shorter works. So we need these materials, and we need to build more relationships with people, with translators, with other publishers. And I think there's always that sense, perhaps in Wales, that we do reach out to Europe as well, but between geographically, we're right on the coast, a lot of us in Wales, the other side, and we're behind London, and we're behind the English language, and it takes a lot for us to get that, to get noticed, and to kind of peer over the parapet and say we're actually here, and we've been here for a long time, and to be open for discussion. So I think it's just continuity, advocates, and the professionalisation of writing. Even though it's an extremely respected thing in Wales, I don't think perhaps in the past we have been as professionalised. And without advocates and agents, it becomes very difficult for us to move forward and to move out.
Thank you. And Angus, can I ask you about the kind of infrastructure that you have in Scotland, specifically with the Gaelic language for this kind of thing? Because in the Basque country, in Wales, we have Wales Literature Exchange. In Catalonia, there are advocates for this. They may not be funded adequately. They may not have the sufficient resources. But what do you have to internationalise your career?
Well, I am here today courtesy of Creative Scotland, what used to be known as the Scottish Arts Council. And in terms of their advocacy of Gaelic literature, they've been very supportive. We've got very strong links with our Irish equivalents, for example. But the other factor I should have made mention earlier of the Gaelic College in Skye, where I was right in residence. That was an entity that began when a merchant banker from Edinburgh, an old Etonian merchant banker, bought an estate and found this redundant farmstead and thought, what should we do with it? He was a curious character, Ian Noble. He had learned Gaelic with a wonderfully non-Gaelic accent, but he said to his colleagues on the board of his business, why don't we establish the first centre of adult Gaelic education in Scotland since Columba's Iona? And it began as an institution for people learning the language. They ran summer schools, and then they ran full-time schools. And to this day, you will hear people being interviewed on Gaelic television, Gaelic radio, who obviously come from other parts of the world, who have come through the Gaelic College, which is now, it has grown into a separate unit. It is a campus of the University of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. It's a thoroughly well-rooted establishment. But because of a lot of the things that have happened for Gaelic, I would say, have happened by accident. This was the accident of a gentleman being on holiday in Skye, stranded. There were no bridges then, stranded by bad weather, and told to look at an estate in the south end of Skye, which he had to look at it to see if he could do business as a banker. Bought the estate and found this redundant farmstead that he turned into the Gaelic College. So much of where we are in today's Gaeldom happened by that kind of little accident. We didn't have a Cymdeithas yr Iaith Gymraeg. We had Uncommon Gaelic, which is a pretty ineffectual Gaelic language association. We didn't have militancy to the same extent as the Welsh had in terms of creating support for the language. It has happened almost organically, but it's happening.
Mm-hmm. So militancy, advocacy, but also universities play a role, especially in taking the language beyond its borders, its territory, traditional territory, if you like. And through universities, we can also find the translators of the future into other languages as well. And if we look at perhaps the situation with Etxepare Institute that sponsors or partly sponsors lectureships in Basque in about 30 universities across the globe, then that is the beginnings, at least, of, you know, a certain number of translators into key target languages. Carmela, your book, Amarenescuach, yeah, her Mother's Hands, which is also a film, may I say, that has been translated into English quite recently and published by Parthian Books. And also you're included in this anthology, 0 Hours on the Boulevard, Tales of Independence and Belonging, which will be actually launched this evening. 7 o'clock, the Grove pub, is that right? Okay, you're all invited. I don't know if I should have said that, but I have. And this is also published by Parthian. Richard Davis of Parthian is sitting at the back there waving his hand. So some of your work is getting into English now, but what do you see as the main things that you'd like to put in place to enhance the internationalization of your career so that you can find your way through that little mouse hole into the great hall?
Yeah, I think one of the keys is at home. At home, you have a good infrastructure in your country, not to be the other, like I said, in your country. So to have support of government, of institutes like Etxepare and these things. This is the most important thing, I think. When you are valued at home, then you can be valued out of your country. I think that is very important, and also, like you said, learn between the university to people or translators that can translate your work from Basque to directly from Basque to another languages. I think also it's important to have contact with another minority languages, like we are doing today. I think to create like a network of we have the same problems. Maybe sometimes are different situations, but are the same problems. So I think it's also important. And also I think it's important. I don't know how can we do that, but to show that also we are writing in a minority language or in another language or a native language, call you as you want. We are talking about things that we are talking about contemporary things, universal themes, something that can be interesting for everyone. It's not a local thing. Is the local, is the whole, like I said before, but we are talking about people in the world. So how can we show? How can we say that to the other people? I don't know, but we need to explain that we are talking about universal themes also.
And to what extent do you think that direct translation is important for the literature of your language? And, you know, will we ever get, let's say, Basque into Czech direct translation? Or do we have to have a more pragmatic approach, possibly, to direct translation if we want to see translation between Smallish languages and not just from Smallish languages into, let's say, the Big Four or so on?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, being translated through a bridge language?
Yeah, sometimes it's not possible, okay, to do this direct translation. Sometimes you need a bridge, another, like you say, another languages, and of course you have the danger of the lost in translation, okay. Yeah. But I think. For us, for example, when I translate to Spanish, I translate my own. And when this book is going to be translated to another language, sometimes the translators use both. because both are written directly by me, different way. But I think it's important if it's possible to do this translation directly from the original language. If it's impossible, of course, you have to use another languages.
And Albert, what about translation into Catalan from a diverse range of languages? You talked earlier about that Catalan literature perhaps needs to go for more of a slow cook, and perhaps you said we need to be better writers. Do you need to read more translated literature in Catalan in order to be better writers? Do you need to have a diversification of your source languages to enrich your literary culture?
Well, of course, all reading is good, and it's so we will agree. We will all agree that as much literature translated is good. But what I want to say is that we in Barcelona have this Catalan will always be the small part of the game, and then Spanish language is huge in there, no? So most of the classic English writers or whatever, I read them through Spanish, and the problem is that so we need to be able to read them through Catalan, translate it into Catalan, but also we need, I think that for a writer, learning how to write through translations is not as good as learning how to write through your original ones. So I think we as Catalan writers have to go and find our 19th century writers with all this richness of the Catalan, rural Catalan, and all these things. And at least I find it's funnier than go and try to. So I can get lots of inputs through other languages, but I think I would prefer to read English writers directly in English, and then go for my ancestors, my Catalan ancestors that had this really rich language, or because our languages are rich and full of, and so that would be my answer, yeah.
And Carol, sometimes with your children's books, you write them in Welsh and in English, but with your prose, with your novels, with your short stories, you tend to have them translated by somebody else. And why have you taken those decisions during your career?
Well, just to come back, just a point that Angus made earlier, actually. I had a very interesting experience recently in Cardiff Children's Literature Festival, where there was a room full of children and their parents, and the parents, all the children seemed to be enjoying themselves, but the parents were looking at me completely bemused, and then that's why I realised that they had a generation, the younger kids could all speak Welsh and were participating, and all the parents were of a generation that didn't. So things like that, I mean, the scene is changing all the time, and it's really exciting in that way. I mean, as with any writer, I think the idea comes first, and the truth of the idea. And sometimes I feel I have an English idea, and sometimes I feel I have Welsh ideas. And some ideas work in both. So as I was finding my voice as a writer, and people often say, well, why don't you write in English? I mean, it's difficult enough to find your voice in one language and to do it well, and to find it again in another language is something completely different. And I know there's an old saying that we're a different person in every language that we speak, and there must be some truth in that. But I often let the ideas lead the way, and then I either translate myself, but I often have somebody else translate as well, because I find that I maybe have moved on and I'm working on something else, and I don't want to come back to that world right now, or I feel that they have a certain critical distance that I may not have as the writer of that work. So it tends to be quite organic and to see. But I mean, the last children's book I wrote, Little Honeybee, that's been an interesting one because we almost brought them out simultaneously. And the illustrator on that, she's French, and she moved to Llangwryfan, a small village near my, and within a year she was speaking Welsh. So that was interesting because I could give her the Welsh text. The illustrations are quite European, quite French in feel, but it's also, I translated it into English. So each project brings with it its different joys and its different challenges. So yeah, it is a project by project way of doing it. But I mean, what I have done in the past as well is had to make decisions about would I adapt. I've had two films made of my novels, and I've let one of them go to somebody else. But I've written the script myself as a stepping stone into writing, into screenwriting, and that served me quite well with that. So these are the decisions that one has to make all the time, sometimes for time reasons because there's only one of you and you need to be getting on with other things, but sometimes it's for creative reasons and sometimes it's just practical.
And Angus, what would you say are the priorities for translating to and from Scottish Gaelic today?
I think probably the simplest one is, if at all possible, have a knowledge of the language. I'm in a position where I do, and I think probably most Gaelic and Welsh poets tend to translate our own poems. But there's an interesting little, I think, demonstration of the subtleties involved. My new and selected is called Genugara Rishachlok, translated as laughing at the clock, but if you were to translate it literally as making laughter to the clock. So you already see there are little nuances of difference that it would be helpful to know if you're translating into another language. You're not just translating a sentence, you're not just translating a phrase, you're translating an idiom as well. And knowing or having a sense of the idiomatic vigour of a language can be very, very helpful when you're translating into another language. Most of the work of mine has gone from the English version into the other language. The one exception would be our cousin language, or our sibling language, I should say, Irish, where the Irish translator will also often have some knowledge at least of Scots Gaelic. Paddy Bush, a very fine Irish poet, writes in both English and Irish. Paddy's translated some of my poetry into Irish, and he benefits not just from being able to nudge the original for information, but his own knowledge of the two languages as well.
And to close, Noas, what should we expect to see either from you next, or what should we look out for in Scottish Gaelic literature?
From me next, a collection of poems in English. Do forgive me.
Okay. And Carol, what should we expect from you next? Or what should we expect from Welsh literature?
From me next, I'm just finishing this second series of Hidden, so hopefully that'll tie up quite soon. I'm also working on some new screenwriting and continuing with my next novel. So,
and Hidden is available on BBC iPlayer.
It is.
Crime genre, very good. I hope so. Albert, what do we expect from you or from Catalan literature?
From me, I'm still researching for my third novel. Yesterday I was doing some research here in London, and I don't know, Catalan literature has a very bright future, but I recommend you to read our classics, the ones that are right now translated into English, at least.
So, which writers in particular?
Yeah, the ones that I said, like Joan Salas, Marcelo Dureda. This is a good starting point to then switch to the actual ones.
Okay, so get reading Joan Salas then. And finally, Carmele, what do we expect from you, and what do we expect from Basque literature?
Okay, from Basque literature, we can expect a lot of good things, because I think it's true. We are in our best moment, in a good creation moment. There are a lot of writers, young and young, good writings. And for me, I'm writing a novel, and I expect to finish it this year and publish it this year. So I'm working on that.
Well, great. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi'ch pedwar. Thank you very much, all four of the panellists. I've really enjoyed myself this morning into this afternoon. Esgeric Asgobenetan. Moltes gracias. Capaliat. Is that it? Have I got my pronunciation correct there? Tapalat. I'm not so good with Scottish Gaelic. Diolch yn fawr iawn hefyd, Caryl. So if you want to know more about the literatures of these languages, go to Creative Scotland upstairs, go to Wales Stand just over there, go to Ramoniol and Catalonia, which is near the oil-producing nations, I noticed, and Etipare is around here somewhere. Not sure exactly. Anyway, but they're present here. And also, Literature Across Frontiers is an organisation that brings together many writers from not only what we've been calling loosely Indigenous languages this morning, but writers from many other languages, small and large in terms of numbers of speakers. So enjoy the rest of London Book Fair, and thank you very much for being such an attentive audience.